and ran his hand unreflectingly through his fine, straight hair. His hat! Damn! Where had he left his hat? On the bench, of course. In the Hofgarten, where he'd sat for 10 minutes staring at a flower bed in a fearful quandary, wondering agitatedly if he was doing the correct thing, suddenly unsure of himself, of this trip to Vienna and everything it portended. What if it was all a mistake, all vain hope and ultimately pointless? He looked at his wristwatch. Damn again. He'd be late for his appointment if he went back. He liked that hat, his narrow-brim boater with the maroon silk band, bought in Locket's on Jermyn Street. Someone would have stolen it in an instant, he was sure. Another reason not to retrace his steps, and he cursed his distractedness again, setting off once more up Herrengasse. It just showed you how tense he was, he thought, how preoccupied. To rise up and walk away from a park bench and not automatically set your hat firmly on your head. He was clearly more jittery and apprehensive about this meeting than even his obvious, perfectly understandable nervousness would indicate. Calm down, he said to himself, listening to the measured click of the metalled crescent set in the leather heels of his shoes as they struck the stone paving. Calm down. This is just the first appointment. You can walk away, go back to London. No one is holding a loaded gun to your head, forcing you. He exhaled. It was a fine day in August 1913, he said to himself out loud, but in a low voice, just enough to change the subject and readjust his mood. Es war ein schöner Augusttag des Jahres. 1913. He repeated in German, adding the date in English. He had trouble with numbers, long numbers and dates. His German was improving fast, but he might ask Herr Barth, his teacher, to do an hour or so on numbers, to try and fix them in his head. Ein schöner Augusttag. He saw another defaced poster on the wall, like the one he'd spotted as he walked into Michaela Platz. That was the third he'd seen since setting out from his lodgings this morning. It had been clumsily torn from its hoarding, ripped away from wherever the glue was not strong enough to hold the paper fast. At the first poster, just next to the tram stop near the room he was renting, his eye had been held by what remained of the body, the head had gone, of the scantily clad maiden it displayed. She was almost naked, cowering, hands pressed to her sizable breasts, cupping them protectively, a semi-visible filmy swirl of self-supporting veil protecting her modesty at the plump juncture of her thighs. Something about the reality of the drawing was particularly compelling, however stylized the situation she was in, that airborne handy veil, and he had paused to take a closer look. He had no idea what the context of this image was, as everything else had been torn away. However, on the second defaced poster, the end of a scaly, saw-toothed reptilian tail explained why the nymph, or the goddess, or whatever she was, appeared so terrified. And now on the third poster some lettering was left, P-E-R-S, and below that, und, and below that, Ein Oper von Gottlieb Toll. He thought, Pers? Persephone? An opera about Persephone? Wasn't she the one dragged off to the underworld and Narcissus, was it? Had to go and fetch her back without looking round? Or was that Eurydice? Or something? Orpheus? Not for the first time he resented his eccentric and patchwork education. He knew a lot about a few things and very little about a great deal of things. He was taking steps to remedy the situation, reading as widely as he could, writing his poems, but every now and then his ignorance stared him candidly in the face. One of the hazards of his profession, he admitted. And classical myths and references were certainly a bit of a jumble, not to say a prominent whole. He looked back at the poster. Only the top half of the head had survived the shredding on this one. Arabesques of wind-lashed hair and wide eyes peering over the ragged edge of the horizontal rip as if, Lysander thought, she was staring horrified over the top of a bedsheet, piecing together the fragments of the three posters in his head to form a notional body of the goddess. Lysander found himself briefly stirred, sexually. A naked woman, young, beautiful, vulnerable, confronted by some squamous, no doubt phallic monster about to ravish her. And no doubt this was the purpose of the posters, and no doubt, furthermore, this was what had provoked the prudish bourgeois outrage that had made some good citizen decide to vandalise the display. All very modern, all very Viennese, he supposed. Lysander strode on, deliberately analysing his mood. Why should this poster depicting the potential ravishment of some mythological woman